Madam President, I rise as the lead sponsor of the Teacher First Responder Back to Work Act, and I rise in favor of jobs, in favor of teachers, in favor of police officers and firefighters, of keeping our communities safe, and the promise we made to first responders after September 11th. Now, we have a choice, and I listened to the distinguished Republican leader, but, you know, it's interesting how history can be viewed through different lenses. What I failed to hear was the challenges that this president and this country inherited from 8 years of policies that led us in 2008 to the verge not of the Great Recession we have been referring to, but on the verge of a new depression, where the chairman of the Federal Reserve and the former Secretary of the Treasury under President Bush came before members of Congress and said we have a series of financial institutions on the verge of collapse. If they collapse, they'll create systemic risk to the entire country's economy, and every American will feel the consequences of it. And the result of that, of 8 years of largely unregulated processes, created excesses where large entities made decisions that ultimately became the collective responsibility of everybody in this country, because failure to have met those responsibilities would have meant a collapse in this country. Now, there are those in the Senate who advocate going back to those very policies. They talk about stopping each and every regulation. Those regulations ultimately, the lack of it and the lack of enforcement of it is what gave us the excesses that we had. Additionally, 2 wars raging abroad, totally unpaid for. Fiscal responsibility went out the window there. Tax cuts, totally unpaid for. Fiscal responsibility went out the window there. And the culmination of all of that brought us to January of 2009, when the new president takes office and has already inherited millions of jobs that had been lost prior to then. Around 7.5% unemployment was the starting point already. And in the first quarter of 2009, before he could even do anything, before he could take the oath of office in late January, swear in a cabinet in February, and send a plan to March, another 2 million jobs were lost. So I find it interesting how we forget all of that, at least as a starting point. We've had 19 months of private sector growth, a little over 2 million jobs. That's good news, but where we have been shedding many of the jobs is in the very essence of those in the public sector who teach our children, who prepare for the next generation and the competitive future of America, and who protect our communities. Police officers who protect us from crime, firefighters that respond when there is an emergency in our communities. With the Teachers and First Responders Back to Work Act, we can fulfill our duty to educate our children and keep our communities safe, or we can gamble our future on the political games that we have seen here that disinvest in the future of our children and the safety of our communities. Almost 300,000 education jobs are on the chopping block this year in this country, at a time when other countries in the world are increasing their educational workforce. We are in the process of decreasing it. New Jersey, my home state, is facing a $10.5 billion shortfall in its 2012 budget. That means more cuts in state and local spending for education, and that hurts our children. The Teachers and First Responders Back to Work Act creates 400,000 education jobs, because an investment in our teachers is an investment in our children and in our collective future. We're talking about $30 billion to states and local communities to retain, to hire, to rehire the teachers that have already been separated, to educate tomorrow's entrepreneurs. In my state of New Jersey, that bill would provide an additional $831 million in funds to support an additional 9,300 education jobs that largely have been lost. New Jersey alone has lost over 6,000 teachers since 2008, slowing our economic recovery and creating a huge knowledge gap in our schools. And what does that gap translate in terms of lost knowledge? What does it mean to a promising young scientist who needs some guidance or a struggling student who needs a little extra help? Madam President, I know about the power of a teacher. I know it through my own personal life. I've had several great teachers along the way, but there was one who made a huge difference in my life. I still remember her name, Gail Harper. She was my speech teacher in in high school, I'm sorry. And, you know, I know some of my colleagues won't believe this, but I was among the most introverted persons at that time in my life. I didn't even want to take the speech course, but I was told by my guidance counselor that it was a must. And I was a good student, honor student, but I didn't want to take the speech course because I didn't want to do any extemporaneous speaking. I didn't want to get up in front of the class. I didn't want to read assignments. I didn't want to do any of that. And I was forced to take it. And I would prepare my work, but I wouldn't deliver it. And finally, Gail Harper, the teacher, said to me, Robert, kept me after class one day and said, look, I don't know why you prepare yourself. Your preparation is great. But if you don't deliver this year, you're going to fail. And my mother, who had fled a country to come to freedom and was convinced that I'd be the first in my family to go to college, told me failure is not an option. So when I heard Gail Harper talk about failure, I knew that that was not an option. And she worked with me to nurture my abilities so that I could break out of that self-imposed shell and really transform my life. In some respects, thinking that I am here today speaking on the Senate floor is because of Gail Harper. So I fully understand how teachers can make a huge difference in the life of a young person. We need to reinvest in teachers, in education, in New Jersey's kids, and in America's future. We need to get those 6,000 New Jersey teachers back in New Jersey classrooms and hire thousands more in every school in every state in America. And then I turned to the police and firefighters, and I remember living in the New Jersey, New York region that fateful day on September 11th, a little over a decade ago. On that fateful day, it was not the federal government that responded to the tragedy and the horror of the World Trade Center. It was local police, local firefighters, local emergency management that were the first responders, that risked their lives, that gave their lives on that fateful day. We made a promise to every community that we would keep communities safe in America in a post-September 11th world, that we would give cops and firefighters what they needed to do their jobs. Every member of Congress wanted to take a picture with a police officer or a firefighter. We call them heroes. And now Republicans want to zero out the COPS program that puts police officers on the beat. They want to break our promises after September 11th, and I think it's time to make good on it with the $5 billion that our legislation provides so communities can hire and keep cops and firefighters on the job. They're our first line of defense. We learned that after September 11th. And I don't care where you are on the political spectrum or what you believe the role of government is, we can all agree that public safety and the security of our communities is government's most fundamental responsibility. We don't need police and firefighters just in the big cities, although they face some of the major challenges. We need them in every town and community. Over 2,700 communities applied for help to fund 9,000 officers in the last round for a total of $2 billion. But because of the opposition on those on the Republican side to keeping our promise to first responders, only $243 million was available, enough for only 238 of 2,700 communities that applied. That's 9%. And it was capped at 25 officers no matter how big the city or how great the need. In New Jersey, more than 150 communities applied for funding to keep cops on the job. Only 12 of those 150 were funded. Those 12 communities were only able to hire approximately 78 cops over the course of the next 3 years. Right now in New Jersey, there are 705 police officers who lost their jobs and can't find law enforcement work. 705 fewer sworn officers on the street. And there are 4,000 fewer officers today in New Jersey than there were on December 31st of 2009. Public safety is government's #1 responsibility, and it's time to deliver on that promise after September 11th to our communities and our first responders. This legislation includes $5 billion to help first responders stay on the job, close the public safety gap, and keep our communities safe. So let me conclude by saying, according to a CNN poll released just yesterday afternoon, 75% of Americans support providing funding to state and local governments to hire teachers and first responders, including 63% of Republicans. Mr. President, we have a choice. With this legislation, we can fulfill our duty to educate our kids and keep our communities safe, or we can gamble our future on political games that don't invest in our children, our economy, and the safety of our communities. I think the choice is clear. I choose educating our kids. I choose protecting our communities. I choose investing in our future. And we do this all and pay for it at the same time. This is the beginning of a fight, and we will be back again and again to force our friends on the other side to make the choice again and again about whose side are they on. I think the choices are pretty clear. The American people have spoken. It's time to get our teachers and our first responders back to work. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.